Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, May the 19th, 2025. Today there is a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn. Now that might sound obscure. Sesquiquadrate, what is that? Well, it's an 135-degree aspect, and if you want to visualize 135 degrees, imagine a cake cut into 8 equal slices, and 3 of those slices make up 135 degrees. And it is a tense aspect, and Mars and Saturn are potentially quite a difficult pair. And I do think this aspect could have an impact on how we feel today, and it also might have an impact on certain famous people. For example, Volodymyr Zelensky, who is in the thumbnail. But before we talk about Mars and Saturn, let's consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, May the 19th, 2025. As always, if appropriate, don't forget to like and subscribe. So here is the chart for today, set for noon. New York time, May the 19th, and the moon is in Aquarius, so it's at sort of 18 degrees Aquarius at noon. It's making a sextile to Venus and an opposition to Mars. So moon in Aquarius, sextile Venus in Aries, that is in itself a reasonable aspect. It's not especially emotional. After all, it's moon in Aquarius and Saturn rules Aquarius, but it's sextile Venus. So, if we make the effort, we can get on with people, but we mustn't take things to heart, mustn't allow people to annoy us. I mean, after all, the moon does make an opposition to Mars. And so moon opposition Mars, we can get annoyed. We may insist that we're right. This Moon-Mars opposition is in fixed signs, but maybe Venus is the way through. Venus in Aries doesn't take things too personally, and that's how we should go about today. Just enjoy people's company. Don't take things too seriously. Don't get too emotional. Now, the headline aspect for today, though, is Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and we can see that Mars is at 14 degrees Leo, coming up to 15 degrees Leo, and Saturn is very close to the Aries point, 29-34 Pisces. So they are 135 degrees apart, and as I always say, Mars and Saturn can be a difficult pairing. They can be about frustration, things not working to plan, and everything being hard work. And there is an association with death, with Mars and Saturn. They are the death pair. And it may be that, when we look at what's happening in this tragic world of ours, we can see a fair amount of death and destruction. And it is close to the Aries point, and that reminds us that this aspect is about the world. The Aries point, 0 degrees Aries, is about it's about the planet on which we live. And so, as Saturn moves towards the Aries point, we realize its limitations. And then Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to the Aries point. So that makes this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate, all the more poignant. And, while this is going on, there is a semisquare between Mercury and Neptune. And this just makes the whole thing more complicated. Mars and Saturn are trying to find some structure, but it's hard work. And when we think we've found structure, Mercury semisquare Neptune is about things being rather nebulous. We try our hardest to understand, but still things become rather confused. So, what do we do? Well, what we could do is we could make the best of things. And we could maybe concentrate on another aspect that on the surface sounds obscure, and that is a quintile between Venus and Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter are 72 degrees apart. 72 degrees is 1/5 of a circle, and it's kind of interesting. Mars and Saturn are the two malefics, and they are in a sesquiquadrate, but Venus and Jupiter, the two benefics, are in quintile aspect. And that quintile may need some work, and it starts with us. It starts with our will. We make a decision that we want things to be better. We have a vision, an image of how things could be. It might seem far-fetched, but it being a quintile, if we put in the work, then in the end, we can start to make a positive impact. Yeah, positive impact. And we may be talking about a positive approach, a bit of positive thinking. Now, it's always a problem, positive thinking, because sometimes being positive just really doesn't help. We can be as positive as we like, but it doesn't change anything. But with this Venus quintile Jupiter, maybe there is a place for positive thinking today. And so that's the picture for New York. If we just quickly look at today, set for noon, Sydney, Australia. Moon is a bit earlier in the sign. Moon is at 11 Aquarius rather than 18 Aquarius. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, that moon sextile Venus and that moon opposition Mars are going to be particularly strong. And so there is anger, moon opposition Mars, but there's also the resolution to that anger, which is that moon sextile Venus. But I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of difference between the experience of people in Australia or New Zealand and, say, the people in California or other parts of the Americas. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and we still have this grand trine. Venus is still opposition Jupiter. We've still got Neptune kind of making a grand... Did I say a grand trine? I didn't say a grand trine. I meant to say a T-square. Sorry. T-square. Venus opposition Jupiter with Neptune on the T. So we're trying to make the best of things, and it can be hard work, but that's what we're trying to do. And notice that the Earth is still opposition Uranus, in the same way that the Sun is still pretty close to Uranus. Okay, that Sun-Uranus conjunction was exact over the weekend, and it's starting to separate, but it's still very much there. And don't forget that Sun conjunct Uranus geocentric is the same as Earth opposition Uranus heliocentric. So there are still things going on. There are things that might bother us, that might be of concern, and we can't necessarily assume that things are going to work out in the same old way. And we must always make allowances for the unexpected. So that's the heliocentric picture. Nothing I haven't really said before. And so let's now look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, May the 19th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you are in a mixed state of mind. On one hand, you would like to be positive. You'd like everything to go to plan, and you don't want any trouble. You want to get on with people. Why not? The moon is making a sextile to Venus. Venus is in Aries. So, if you try hard to be nice, then it's reasonable to assume that other people are going to be nice back. And maybe that's the way it can be. But I don't know, there are complications. For one thing, the moon is making an opposition to Mars. Moon opposition Mars can be a somewhat difficult aspect. Someone insists that they are right and they won't be told. Could be you. I mean, you're quite capable of digging your heels in if you feel you're the one that has the answers. Why would you want to be contradicted? On the other hand, other people might be just being obnoxious. You have your ideas and you want to do things your way, but someone else has other ideas, and what do? You can't compromise. You can't show weakness, but at the same time, you don't want to get involved in some big argument, do you? And unfortunately, we have Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. So Mars is your ruler. It's making a sesquiquadrate aspect to Saturn. This Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is, I believe, an important aspect. And like it or not, there may be things going on which are really quite frustrating. You want to take action, but you can't. And you have to consider, what is actually holding you back? Who is holding you back? Or is it a figment of your imagination? Now, Saturn in Pisces may represent your own fears, and you may not acknowledge those fears. You may want to blame it on another person. It's not your fault. If it wasn't like this, if the world wasn't configured in such a ridiculous way, you would have your freedom. So it's not your fault. At least that's how it feels. But it is possible, Aries, that you, at some level, don't want to do something, and you're trying to come up with a reason why it can't be done. And that might be the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Mars, don't forget, Mars is in Leo. That is a great place for Mars to be. And Mars additionally is on the Aries point. Well, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to the Aries point. So that is about you acting in the world, and you really can do some amazing stuff, and you can be really creative, and people can notice you, but somehow you're not entirely convinced, and something might be holding you back. And perhaps you should ask yourself, what is it? And I don't think it's really a matter of blaming another person. Certainly not in its entirety. Responsibilities should be shared, and if there's something that's important for you to do, then Aries, find a way of doing it, and just don't allow your own fears to trip you up, and be aware of those fears. I mean, you really are rather stuck if you have fears, but you don't know that it's your own fears that are holding you back. And finally, looking at relationships, I have to say that Venus is now getting very close to the trine of Mars, less than a degree now. So I do think that this is a time that if you behave in the right way and you're reasonable, okay, you don't have to be too reasonable, but if you're reasonable enough, then you're going to find ways of getting on with people. And even if you have a real disagreement with them, you feel that you're incompatible with them, then there's still a way to find enough common ground. And so Aries, today it's just important to be reasonable, to be rational, and don't get too angry about anything, and try not to blame people if things don't go right. Okay, in the end, it may be another person's fault, but consider other alternatives. Consider a psychological dimension that, maybe at a psychological level you are perhaps holding yourself back. Taurus. Taurus, the moon is in Aquarius, and the moon in Aquarius is, it's a pretty high-profile sign for you. I mean, after all, Aquarius is at the top of the chart. And, with the moon in Aquarius making a sextile to Venus, your ruler, it might be a time, Taurus, where you feel that you can really get going on things. And I'm fairly certain that you have real ambitions, things that you want to achieve. And they might be rather different, rather even, unique. You have your own way of doing things. You don't just take a solution off the shelf, or you follow the crowd. No, not at the moment. Certainly not with the moon in Aquarius. So, yeah, do things your own way. And if you feel that what you're doing is not necessarily going to be popular, or people might not understand what you're doing, and you don't have to advertise it. You can keep a lot of your plans secret. That might be the right thing to do. While Venus is in Aries, it's a different picture when Venus moves into Taurus. But Venus is not in Taurus right now. When does Venus move into Taurus? That's coming up soon. Venus moves into Taurus, looks like around June the 6th. So we've got a few weeks before Venus is in Taurus. But when Venus does move into Taurus, things will really start moving, and perhaps you can be more open about some of your ideas and some of your plans. And so don't write today off, because there is a lot that can be accomplished, and you don't have to be reliant on other people. Other people have got their own issues, and if you actually are too reliant on other people, you might find that they just can't come up with the goods. They might make promises in good faith. They might make their promises, but still they can't honor these promises. So yeah, do look after yourself, and make sure that you're not in a position where you are absolutely reliant on another person coming up with the goods. Now, if we try to focus on the positive today, then we would start to think about a quintile aspect between Venus and Jupiter. So Venus and Jupiter, they're 72 degrees apart. Venus is, of course, your ruler. Jupiter is the planet of good fortune. And the quintile is not an aspect about giving you something on a silver plate. That's absolutely not what it is about. It is about you going through the process of creating something. So quintiles are about the will. What are you trying to bring into existence? And it starts with an idea. It starts with you realizing that things could be better. Venus, quintile, Jupiter. That you don't have to be satisfied with second best. And so you start with that idea and you work on it, and it gets bigger and it becomes more established. It becomes more established in your consciousness, in your awareness, and you can perhaps start to talk about it a little. Okay, maybe you are only talking about it to yourself. You don't necessarily have to talk about it to other people, especially now. I mean, I think that right now, even until Venus moves into Gemini at the beginning of June, there is certainly an advantage in being quite secretive, but you start to get an idea about where you're going, and then you can move forward with it, and you can start to show the world that you really are able to make things happen. And so what starts as just an idea that things could be better actually can become a reality. But you've got to believe in yourself, and you've got to be able to put in the work. Now, I've just said that today might be a little bit introspective. I've suggested that you don't have to tell people what's on your mind always, but Venus is making a trine to Mars. Just a constant reminder. I have to constantly remind you of that, because Mars is the ruler of your seventh house of Scorpio, which is, Scorpio is the opposite sign to Taurus. And so, with that Venus trine Mars, only 1 degree apart now, there is the possibility of getting on with people, on your own terms. You don't have to do things another person's way. And, you should be concentrating on what is familiar, what makes you feel comfortable. And when you're with other people, you should be focusing on what is familiar. It's not about looking for variety or necessarily looking for excitement. I mean, you can have excitement if you want today, but I don't think it's really what you want. You want results, for sure. I mean, the moon is in Aquarius, making that sextile to Venus, but you want results on your terms, and you're not looking for anything too dramatic. Gemini, Mercury is making a semisquare to Neptune. And you could say that from a Gemini perspective, that is the main thing going on today. And this semisquare between Mercury and Neptune could be a little bit difficult to manage. I mean, you're trying to understand what is happening. I mean, that's something that Geminis are always trying to do. They're always trying to understand something. The mind never stops, at least if you're a Gemini, it never stops. And Neptune may represent sort of new information, and you see something in a new way, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. And you may find that other people are difficult to understand, and they might be confusing. They might say one thing, do something else, and they might not be especially clear about their intentions. Now, that could trip you up. It could certainly slow you down, but I don't think it should really worry you. I mean, today, Gemini, I think that you're quite good at getting on with people, and you maybe should just be tolerant. Accept that people are difficult to understand. Accept that they do sometimes give off, confusing messages, and you haven't got a clue what's going to happen next. And that might be exciting in its own way. So, try not to take people's words too seriously, or even their actions too seriously. It might just all be a show, and it's not a good day for reaching definite conclusions. So if you can be a little bit nebulous, and if you can deal with a certain amount of ambiguity, that would be great. And additionally, don't allow small things to get you down. The moon is in Aquarius, making an opposition to Mars, and moon in Aquarius for you, Gemini, is about your ability to move above things, beyond things, not having to get caught up in mindless detail. But that mindless detail might suddenly sort of crop up when you least expect it. Someone says something that you really can't be bothered with, but it's just so annoying. And maybe you just shouldn't take people's words too seriously, especially if those words feel like they're a threat, or someone is trying to limit your freedom of action, or even freedom of thought by what they say. So you just need to sort of be able to sort of float over and above it, and then I think that things should be fine, and you'll feel pretty comfortable about whatever is happening today. Yeah, but don't take things too seriously, especially with that Mercury semi-square Neptune. It's not a day for taking your own thoughts and impressions too seriously, because it's an ever-changing landscape, and if you concentrate on one thing for too long, you might get trapped, and that would not just be frustrating, but you might sort of be limiting the possibilities of new experience. And new experience is something you should be looking for, but it's a constantly changing thing, and you don't want things to get stuck in one place. Cancer. Cancer, you know that some things just are difficult, and you also know that it's not necessarily your problem. It's just the way it is, and you can try your hardest to make sense of some things, but it just is still not going to make sense. And you can keep asking, you can keep looking for the answers, and in the end you might actually find what you're looking for. And a lot depends on why you are doing what you are doing. It's important to have a reason. If you don't have a reason, then everything just becomes chaotic and unstructured, and you just don't know where you're going. And if you can't find a reason for anything today, then Cancer, well, just don't bother. Don't do anything. I mean, do you have to do anything? Probably not. So it's important you ask yourself why, and also ask yourself what is at stake. And if you know what's at stake, it's easier to make a decision. And I might go back to that sort of old concept of is it cui bono? Was that Cicero who said cui bono? People use that term a lot in politics. You always ask, how can someone benefit from something? And if you can see the benefit, if you can see how someone else can benefit from something, then you start to know how it's working, and you can understand someone's motivations, because people are motivated by self-interest. And it might be that today, with the moon opposition Mars, that you actually start to become aware of other people's self-interest. And perhaps recently you had been a little bit naive. You'd assumed people were just acting perhaps out of the goodness of their heart, but not now. You are able to see things as they are. So there is a veneer of confusion today, but if you're able to really get to the bottom of things and to really ask the important questions of yourself, then you'll start to see how things are actually working out. And in the end, it might all seem actually very, very obvious. Now, when it comes to relationships, other people probably can't be avoided, but in some respects, some people actually should be avoided. Some people are quite headstrong. They believe in themselves. They believe they've got the answers, and if things don't go their way, they just might get annoyed, and they could take any opportunity to restrict your freedom if you give them a chance. So relationships should possibly be avoided, and you should perhaps avoid getting too close to any one person. Though we've talked about self-interest and how you've always got to consider other people's self-interests and their own motivations about who benefits from something. Who benefits from a crime? That's what cui bono, that concept, was originally used for. If you want to know about a crime, ask yourself who benefits from it. And additionally, you should think perhaps about your benefit. How can you benefit? And with the moon making a sextile to Venus, there is the possibility of benefit there. And it might be that by tangling yourself up in difficult concepts, but you keep working on it, but you can start to make sense of it, and you start to know what you want, and if you do have a feeling of desire, you really feel that something has to happen, and you really want it, then you can make it happen. Yeah, it might be complicated, and you might be ever so slightly devious about it, but in the end, if you really want something, Cancer, then I think today you can actually get hold of it. Leo, we have a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn today, and I think that this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate, is probably the most important aspect of the day. And of course, Mars is in Leo. Mars is in your sign, and so you might interpret this as saying, well, you want to move forward. You really do. There are things you want to do, and you can be quite assertive about it. And then Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, there's something, though, holding you back. And, this isn't just about you, Leo. A lot of people are feeling Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, regardless of their sign. So you could feel that you can't do everything you want to do. And, yeah, that really can be frustrating. And you perhaps need to ask yourself why. Why is it that you try to move forward, but it just doesn't work? And it may just be a question of commitment, that you yourself may not be sufficiently committed, and that might be because you have your own doubts. So, Leo is a fixed sign, and Leo can actually be very focused on what it wants. So if you then have doubts, then how can you expect yourself to actually achieve anything? Doubts don't really fit well with the Leo view of the world, and so where there are doubts, there's a problem. So try to break free from your doubts, and if you can't, well, ask yourself, what is the problem? There's something holding you back, and it may be something quite real, but find out what it is, because Mars is desperate for action, and it is a time, Leo, when you can be successful. The sun is still moving through Taurus, although it is moving to the end of the sign. In fact, tomorrow the sun goes into Gemini, and so I think that today may be the last full day in which the sun is in Taurus. And yeah, the sun moving into Gemini has its advantages, but with the sun in Taurus, it is a time of the year, the Taurus season, when you are more ambitious than usual. So if you've got ambitions, and if it's something you really want to move forward with, then really go for it. And so perhaps Monday is a day when you really shouldn't mess around. It's something you want, really go for it. And at the same time, Leo, you're going to have a great need to do better. It's never good enough. You always could do better. At least that's how you feel subjectively. Now, I don't want you to beat yourself up about it, but it's good to have high expectations of yourself. And so if you want to take things further, Leo, I really do think you can. And you certainly shouldn't allow your own worries to hold you back. And it's important not to be too self-conscious. If there's something you want, Leo, then make sure that you actually go out and get it, because I think tomorrow things could be different. Things might not be quite so easy. So make sure you give yourself the best chance of being successful, and don't allow anything or anyone to stand in your way. Virgo. Virgo, the big aspect today is probably a semisquare between Mercury and Neptune. Now, this aspect is important. I mean, Mercury is your ruler, and so with Mercury semisquare Neptune, you might say that might mean that not everything is straightforward. You would certainly like things to be straightforward and easy. I mean, we'd all like things to be straightforward, but the reality is that they're not. And you might just have to deal with a bit of uncertainty. And if things are not clarified for you, you shouldn't panic. And so that might be the way forward. Additionally, this Mercury semisquare Neptune could be an aspect that in its own way is quite spiritual. Virgoans, very often have their own sort of spirituality. Oh, of course, we shouldn't forget that the new Pope is a Virgo, and so it's quite possible that one can be spiritual, and I think you are very spiritual. And with this Mercury semisquare Neptune, this spirituality may be actually emphasized, and it just could be about your capacity for just getting in touch with something, and it's just obvious. You can't necessarily verbalize it, but there's something there, and it might be that you just have a certain knowledge that it's all going to be okay. I mean, that's looking at it from a positive perspective. It's also possible with Mercury semisquare Neptune, you're trying to understand something and you just can't. And this would particularly be a problem from a sort of a non-spiritual perspective. You've got a concrete problem or a concrete issue. You're trying to work it out. But Mercury semisquare Neptune might just be added complications, and no sooner do you think that you come up with a solution than you have to consider something else, and where does it end? And perhaps there comes a stage, Virgo, when you have to stop analyzing. If you analyze for too much, for too long, then really you never get anywhere. And at the moment, probably what you need is a little bit of structure and order. And if you want order, you may have to be independent. If you're too close to other people, then you have to partake of their own views of order, and their views of order may be very different from what you believe is right. And so an independent approach may actually be the best way of giving yourself structure, because if you are independent, then you aren't reliant on other people's peculiarities. Libra, it is a time when you are feeling quite good about yourself. You are aware of what you can do, and you can be quite sort of optimistic. You believe that given the chance that a lot of things can be made possible, and so Libra, try to make the most of whatever you have. And it's probably a bad idea to worry too much about what other people are thinking or suggesting. In fact, too much time spent with other people, too much time spent socializing, it really could be not just exhausting, but it could just really waste a lot of your time. I mean, it's your life. It's not anyone else's life. I mean, other people have got, they've got their own lives to lead, but you've got things you need to do, and you can't spend your time worrying about making other people happy. That's absolutely not the right thing to be doing. And Libra, do try to be imaginative, and don't give up, and don't just assume that things are the way they seem to be, particularly if your first impressions are negative. So you might come into Monday, new week, feeling that things aren't necessarily going your way, and that's not the way it has to be, because right now with Venus, remember Venus is your ruler, Venus making a quintile to Jupiter, this is a great aspect, and it's an aspect that allows you to make things, and you absolutely do not have to be satisfied with the way things are. So if you don't like things, you can change them. If you think that people are being too negative, then you don't have to put up with it. If you feel that the situation is wrong, then you don't have to put up with this situation. And it starts with you, and it starts with you having real willpower, and your willpower can really make the difference, and you can turn a rather mediocre situation into a situation that is full of opportunity, and that can turn out in a way that is really positive for you. But you have to have that willpower. You have to have that knowledge that you can really change things. So try your hardest to tune into that, because I think that could be very positive for you. And in the process, Libra, you should certainly not be satisfied with the status quo. If things are not to your liking, then they can be changed, and you shouldn't worry too much about what other people want. There is room for a little bit of selfishness, constructive selfishness. It's in everyone's best interest, but most of all, it's in your best interests to do things your way. And by creating surprises, or by announcing that you're going to do something, and announcing that you're going to do it, and you don't care what anyone else says, through that kind of abruptness, it might seem like selfishness, you can actually start to have an impact. And I think that people will really start to take you seriously. And finishing up with relationships, I have to say it, Venus is still making a trine to Mars. Venus is now only 1 degree from a trine to Mars. So relationships, do matter. It's got to be on your terms to an extent. It doesn't have to be a situation where you have to be 100% selfish and completely ignore another person's interests, but there is the possibility here of starting to understand someone, and also to understand what is holding them back. Because Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, and so that might represent someone who is close to you but who is really struggling with something. And maybe, Libra, you can get an understanding of actually what they're struggling with. Maybe you can help them out. Scorpio, you may feel that it's all a little bit too much, that there's a lot to be concerned about, and why should you take risks, and why should you have to do something if it's just a whole load of effort? And we can't deny that Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. I do think that this sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn is an important aspect. And of course, Mars is your ruler. Mars rules Scorpio. It's not Pluto. Mars is definitely the ruler of Scorpio. And with this sesquiquadrate to Saturn, you just might be of a view that something is really preventing you from being yourself. And there may be times today where you just feel really rather frustrated, and it may feel that you don't want to waste your time trying to achieve something that is frankly unachievable. I mean, that is a very negative view of Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. There is a more positive view. And the more positive view would be to say, well, there are certainly things you want, but they're not going to be easy to get hold of. And if you are prepared to put in the work, then maybe you can change things. How much work could you have to put in? It could be that you have to put in a lot of work, but actually nothing is going to be easy. And that is probably a reasonable way of looking at Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. If you expect things to be easy, to be just given to you, well, then you're kidding yourself. On the other hand, if you are able to push yourself, perhaps to the limit, then you can really make excellent progress. It will be tough, and there may be moments where you have, real doubts about whether you're doing the right thing, but keep going and really believe in yourself, and then in the end you may have the breakthrough that you're looking for. And in the process, don't ignore other people. Some people can actually be very useful. They can help you sort things out. So if everything in front of you seems really difficult to manage, you don't have to feel that you need to do everything on your own. And I think that help will be available, and that help can take many forms. And it might be that people who are close to you are really willing to offer a hand, but maybe you have to ask them first. They're not going to just offer their good services, because they're not mind readers. And you can't expect people to be mind readers. So if there is something you want, then then you have to ask, because how are other people going to know that you've got something that is really quite important to you? Though Scorpio, this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, I do have to come back to it. It mustn't be underestimated. And an extra dimension to this aspect is that you can see that the world is changing, and it's not just about you. And what used to be easy a few months ago, a few years ago even, things have changed. And so Scorpio, you have to change as the world changes. And this might remind you of how Scorpios approach change. A word that is very often used with Scorpio is transformation. And it's not about slowly changing with the times. It just may be about having a moment of transformation where you see what needs to be done, and then you just change. And it just happens very quickly. And maybe that's what you should be striving for. If you try to change slowly, well, nothing really ever happens, does it, like that? And sometimes it's necessary to just retreat so that you can get your strength back and also realign to a changing world, and then make the necessary change. And you make that change, and it is a transformation. It is quite dramatic, but it's something that is very much for the best. Sagittarius, you need to be enthusiastic and positive, and you really need to to tell yourself that things can work, because I think that things are looking good, but at first they might not be looking good at all. So it could be a situation where appearances can be deceptive, and first appearances may indicate that things are not going to work, and you may feel that it is largely a waste of time. At least that's your first impression, and it needn't be like that. Needn't be like that at all. I think that Sagittarius, if you really believe that something is possible, then actually you can make it possible. And you can find something to be happy about, in the strangest of places. And so everything can be turned round, and perhaps it's like everything has got a dual use and it's got a dual interpretation. So you can interpret something as a negative or you can interpret it as a positive. It really is up to you. And you have a chance, Sagittarius, to go for the positive, to see how things can actually work out. And this might well have a social dimension. And so ask yourself, what's going on in your social environment? Who are the people you're coming across? Again, your first impulse might be to regard everyone as, being rather useless. You've seen them before. You know what they can do. You know what they can't do. It's difficult to be surprised, but you can be surprised, and it's very important, Sagittarius, that people don't get underestimated. And if you give people a chance, I think that you could be pleasantly surprised. And furthermore, Sagittarius, today you are actually very influential. You can have a real impact. And so if you want to change people's minds or change people's approach, then you can do it. And it's through your presence, as well as the way you speak, the way you communicate, the way you write. There is something about you at the moment, Sagittarius, that is really very convincing. And you just may have a way with words, but it just goes further than words. It's just about your personality and about how you present yourself. And so if you are influential, and I think you are influential, then make sure that you use this influence for the wider good. Capricorn. Capricorn, it's a time when you may feel that there are things to be annoyed about. It's because Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. And so, you are Saturn, and you are starting to feel a bit unsure of yourself because Saturn is actually getting ready to change sign. By the end of a week, Saturn will be in Aries. And this movement from Pisces to Aries is dramatic. And yeah, you're aware of it. And Saturn moving into Aries does bring some challenges, which I'm not going to talk about here. But with Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, you may be wondering whether you've achieved everything you need to achieve. And if things aren't going your way, well, Capricorn, you could get annoyed. And there is something about you today which could be a little bit scary. You get scared. You would be scary if you are annoyed, if you are angry. And I don't think that you'll have any difficulty expressing this anger. And it's not going to be an easy anger. It's an anger that just blows up and then it calms down. It could actually be quite a simmering anger. So says Capricorn, what is it that annoys you? And why do you think it's so pressing? I'm not dismissing your anger. I think there are things to be annoyed about, and if something isn't right, then it's important that you express this. And it could be something quite trivial. Don't, for example, discount money. Money is often a source for annoyance, and you might feel that you're hard done by, that you're being ripped off, or you're paying for something you shouldn't be paying for. And so if you do find yourself being annoyed about money, then it's important that you actually go and do something about it. There's no point in just being annoyed for the sake of it, though there is still a feeling of frustration. You want to do stuff, you're ready to take the initiative, but when it actually comes down to it, it's just difficult to apply yourself. And perhaps, Capricorn, you need to just accept this situation, up to a point. Things aren't necessarily going to be easy today. I mean, that's just the way it is. You can't have an easy day every day. And it just may take longer than expected to get things done. And, also, other people may not be particularly supportive. And there's plenty of scope for disagreement. And just try to get that perspective. But you're a Capricorn. You understand that these cycles exist, and you're quite realistic about it. And if you are realistic and you can get a perspective on it, then it shouldn't be such a bad day. Aquarius. It's nice that the moon is still moving through your sign. And through the whole of the day, the moon is moving through Aquarius. So, it's a day when you're feeling, relatively centered. You know what you want, and you know what matters. But also you're aware of why you might not be able to get what you want, at least not at the speed at which you want. I mean, there could be just a slowness to things, and the slowness could be caused by other people's attitude, and other people, may be difficult to avoid. After all, the moon in Aquarius is making an opposition to Mars. So we've got Moon-Mars opposition right across the main axis of your chart. So that Moon-Mars opposition could be annoying. It could be about you knowing what you want, being quite independent-minded about it, and then having to deal with another person, and it's really not what you wanted. And matters aren't helped by the fact that Saturn is involved. Saturn is your ruler. It's in the last degree of Pisces, and it is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. So Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn could be about another person making things difficult for you. And this is a person who finds it difficult to make changes. It could be quite set in their ways, rather like you, kind of. And so it might end up as being, a bit of a deadlock situation, or you just feel that you're at a disadvantage. And one reason might be is the fact that, Saturn is in the process of changing sign now. Saturn, your ruler, last degree of Pisces, getting ready to move into Aries. And it moves into Aries, I think, on Sunday the 25th. So you know it's going to happen, and perhaps because you're not quite sure about where you're going, because you know that you're in this state of kind of not being in one place or another place. You're kind of halfway through the door, and you're trying to make sense of things, and it is difficult. I mean, because Saturn is sesquiquadrate Mars, and that is about you being held back, and because of that sesquiquadrate with Mars, this does mean that relationships of all kinds could be unsatisfactory. People, like to be in relationships. People want to know about relationships. One's supposed to be positive about relationships. But this may be a situation where other people aren't particularly helpful. And if you're connected with other people, they may hold you back. And so it could be a day when you should really try to be as independent as possible. You don't have to be completely independent, but when it comes to the big issues, I think it's just important that it's you making the decisions, and you shouldn't be putting yourself in a situation where another person's actions can hold you back. That is absolutely not something that you want. And even then, when you do try to take action, if there's a situation where you feel you've absolutely got to do something, even then, you might think you've got what it takes, but you might find you haven't. So it's actually difficult to assert yourself, and it's difficult to be dramatic. I mean, at times I think you would like to be dramatic, but it just doesn't work out. And so, Aquarius, you need to work with that, work with the energies of the day, and not try to take on too much, and don't set yourself ambitious targets, and also don't put yourself in a position where another person could hold you back and could frustrate your plans. So a degree of freedom really is going to matter today. Pisces, you may feel that you are not ready for a lot of things. There are a lot of things that you would like to be doing, but you just don't feel entirely ready. And you may then feel that it's a time to be just waiting. You're not quite sure what you're waiting for, but you just know in that Pisces way that now isn't quite the right time. And maybe you can watch other people make mistakes, other people take the initiatives, and see what happens. See how it works for someone else before you put yourself in the firing line. And that approach might sound rather selfish, but you could say that it is pragmatic. And at the same time, Pisces, you are going to be quite influential. You might not actually realize that you're quite influential. So you can do nothing, but also have a presence that people are just going to notice. And if you say things, people are going to listen. If you give people advice, they're going to listen. And that does create a degree of responsibility. So if you tell someone to do something, there's a good chance they're going to do it. You give someone some advice, they'll listen to you. And that means that, it's important that you know what you're talking about. And if you don't know what you're talking about, maybe you should just keep quiet. But still, I mean, we all have areas of expertise, and if you stick to your areas of expertise, and if you talk from a position of knowledge, then Pisces, I do think that people really are going to listen to you. And though, are they going to completely listen to you? Well, Mercury is making a semisquare to Neptune, and this may say something about what's happening. And Mercury semisquare Neptune may relate to other people not really knowing what they're doing, other people being confused, they're looking for guidance, and so they may be particularly keen to get guidance from someone like you. And so in a sense of a competitive situation, if it's you against someone else, then you have an advantage because you give the impression of knowing what you're talking about. But just be aware of other people's weaknesses, and that's where the responsibility lies. And this is especially the case if you're in a relationship or someone is reliant on you, and they're hanging on to your every word, because you could make a mess of things if you really don't know what you're talking about. So please be aware of that. But it is good that you can be noticed, though many Pisceans, as I perhaps already suggested, don't really want to be noticed. the moon is about to move into Pisces. Tomorrow the moon will be in Pisces. And so, maybe you should wait for the moon to go into Pisces. When the moon does move into Pisces, you'll be feeling clearer, and you're going to be more decisive, and you might actually make more sense to yourself once the moon goes into Pisces. I mean, you are making sense to other people, at the moment. That's true, but it's important, as I've kept suggesting today, that you are speaking from a position of real knowledge, not imagined knowledge. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 50, which is the cauldron. The cauldron seems to be a hexagram that comes up quite a lot, and it's a hexagram which I would regard as being quite important. It relates to alchemy. It's about bringing everything together. Everything that we are, we put it into a cauldron, and in that cauldron some magic can take place. Things that aren't connected can suddenly become connected. And this particular cauldron, or rather this particular hexagram, does seem to be quite fortunate. The top line moves. Now, in the I Ching, the top line can be rather difficult, but not in this hexagram. And it's all about the handles. And the I Ching talks a lot about the handles. So if you've got a cauldron which is like boiling hot, then you can burn yourself. And so the handles do matter. Are you actually able to use this cauldron? I mean, if you can't pick up the cauldron, it's useless. And the handles here at the top line, it's telling us they're made of jade. And jade is, of course, a stone that is, particularly important in China. And it is hard and soft at the same time. At least that's what the I Ching is saying. And it is beautiful, and it is durable, and it doesn't corrode. And this may be talking about persistence. We have all our talents, all our abilities, and we can actually utilize them because we can pick them up with these jade handles. So we've got so much to offer ourselves, and we've also got a huge amount to offer other people. So everything that we are, everything that is in the cauldron is there, and it is absolutely available. And there is the suggestion that whatever we do, it will get favorable attention, because it's not just that the contents of the cauldron are in good shape, are working together, but they're presented in the right place, in the right way. And the handles are made of jade. And we've got the top line moving, so that means we move to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 32, which is duration. So we are able to persist with what we've got. So we are able to, bring everything together and keep on going, and just going back to those jade handles. The thing about jade is it doesn't corrode. If it was brass handles or metal candles, it might corrode. But the jade is supposed to be strong enough to keep going. So it does seem that we are getting things together, we're getting ourselves together, and we're able to see things through. And it's not just a flash in the pan or a flash in the cauldron. It's something which can keep going. And I think we have a real chance to show the world what we're made of and what we can do. And now I want to look at the astrology and the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn that we have today. So here is the aspect I'm talking about. So Mars today is 14, 15, 14 and a half Leo. It's 1433 Leo is where the sesquiquadrate happens. So Saturn is at 2933 Pisces. So you can see that Mars in Leo, sesquiquadrate Saturn in Pisces. And Mars and Saturn together, as I always say, they are a very difficult pair. And we can be positive about Mars-Saturn. We can say that people who have Mars-Saturn contacts can be very disciplined. They can be focused. They can be hardworking. And one can always think about positive ways to use Mars-Saturn energy. Whether it's martial arts, drumming, hard work, whatever it is. So it doesn't always have to be negative, but for many people, having a Mars-Saturn aspect in their chart, is hard work. And so when Mars and Saturn are making a sesquiquadrate in the sky, like they are today, on a personal level, that makes things difficult. We have to really struggle, and it can be frustrating. And then we look at things at a collective level, and that can be dangerous because Mars and Saturn are connected with, death and destruction, things going wrong. They are malefics. And, additionally, Saturn is on the Aries point. So Saturn is at 0 degrees Aries. And Mars is at close to 15 Leo. In other words, Mars is sesquiquadrate the Aries point. So that makes this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, even more difficult because of its connection of the Aries point. And that may say something about how this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is impacting, the world at large and what sort of events we have. Telling us something about the news flow. And interestingly, this Mars Saturn sesquiquadrate is happening at the same time as a semisquare between Mercury and Neptune. Now, they are two separate aspects, but still they are coinciding. And Mercury semisquare Neptune could be about people getting themselves into trouble because they don't know what they're doing, just getting confused, making the wrong decisions and creating a mess that is really quite difficult to get out of. And so this is what we've got here is the chart set for it's set for London, but let's just firstly look at the chart in itself and look at the 90-degree dial. So if we put this on a 90-degree dial, remember, conjunctions, squares, oppositions are shown as conjunctions, and semisquares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions. So here is the Mars Saturn semisquare, sesquiquadrate, and it's shown as an opposition, and it is right on the Aries point. So that, to my mind, sort of makes it sort of more poignant, when we can see it as an opposition, and we can start to see, some of the sort of the midpoints it's on. And one midpoint it's on is the Zeus Admetos midpoint. So Zeus is a planet, as a hypothetical planet relating to force and taking action, and Admetos can be about delayed force, or not delayed force. It can be just things which are delayed. I mean, Admetos was a king in ancient Greece who delayed his own death. So Admetos is to do with death, and so Mercury. So Hades, the Hades Admetos midpoint. It could be rather frustrating. In fact, it might be a good idea to see what Alfred Witte, sorry about all the paper rustling, got it around. So if we look at the Zeus Admetos midpoint, I mean, it sounds obscure, but you never know, there might be something interesting here. So to see what Alfred Witte said in his Rules for Planetary Pictures about things on the Zeus Admetos midpoint. So Saturn on the Zeus Admetos midpoint, he says, to be separated from circumstances one is accustomed to and finding the new ones unpleasant. To be in an environment where one feels hampered and depressed. Or Mars on a Zeus Admetos midpoint, to start all over again, to revolt against a hated force, to begin anew on a limited scope. So, yeah, there is a sense of something stuck and having to maybe start again. And yeah, I do think that this is quite a difficult energy. This Mars Saturn opposition. We might consider different places around the world, where this Mars Saturn sesquiquadrate sort of hits home. So if for example we set this chart for London, well, this chart is set for London, and here the sun is on the midheaven. I don't think it's particularly big deal set for London, but if we set it for Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, Saturn is on the descendant. So this Saturn sesquiquadrate Mars could have an impact on Ukraine. I mean, it's difficult to know what impacts Ukraine because there's always stuff going on in Ukraine. I always look at charts set for Ukraine, and they always come up with something. And this particular chart, does indicate that this Saturn sesquiquadrate Mars, may not work particularly well, for example, for Ukraine's war effort. Now, we'll be looking at Volodymyr Zelensky's chart in a moment, so that might give us some added information. Another place to consider might be Delhi. Don't forget that there's just been this clash taking place between India and Pakistan, and this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate, which we could certainly associate with violence and with war. And Mars is on midheaven, if we set this chart for New Delhi, the capital of India. So there may be frustration in the Indian government, perhaps connected with the war, or perhaps connected with this recent conflict with Pakistan. And Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, we have to do something. What are we going to do? And so this could represent some event. And don't forget, the moon is quite close to Mars. Moon is making an opposition to Mars, and so this Mars Saturn's semisquare sesquiquadrate could put some pressure on the Indian government. And I don't know anything about Sri Lanka, but we could set that chart for Sri Lanka as well, and set that chart for Colombo. And again, the Moon-Mars opposition is on the midheaven. So I know that there are relatively recent elections in Sri Lanka. Didn't they have a new president? But I don't really know what's going on in Sri Lanka. But it could be that the Indian subcontinent, particularly India, Sri Lanka, places that we might want to look at. And then Argentina, why not? If we set this chart up for Argentina, Saturn is on the midheaven. And of course, we've got Javier Milei trying to take a chainsaw to the government in Argentina. I don't know how well he's doing. And Saturn's on the midheaven. So it could be heavy going. But I'm afraid I don't really know very much about Argentina. So I don't think I've got really anything useful to say on the subject. And there are a few people who could be affected by this Saturn-Mars sesquiquadrate. For example, Donald Trump's son, Barron. Barron Trump was born on March 20th, 2006. So Barron Trump has his son at 2940. So he is not an Aries. He is a Pisces. But remember, there's no such thing as a cusp in astrology. You're either on one side of the cusp, or you're on either on one side or the other. You can't be both Pisces and Aries at the same time. The change is instantaneous. But Barron Trump does have his sun right at the end of Pisces, so he's going to have Saturn on his sun, and he's going to have, therefore, Mars making a what would it be, a sesquiquadrate to his sun. So that Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate may say something about what he's having to deal with, what he's studying at university. Could say something about his family, his relationship to his father. I mean, I'm not really going to speculate because Barron Trump, he may be Donald Trump's son, but in a way he's not really a public figure. He is entitled to his privacy. And another person who is very much in the public eye, or was in the public eye until very recently, was Justin Trudeau. Now, I just pointed out that Justin Trudeau has had this Sun-Uranus conjunction on his midheaven. And so what's going on with Justin Trudeau? He's no longer Prime Minister. People are they forgetting about Justin Trudeau? Or does he feel that he needs to have a public role? But Sun-Uranus conjunction on his midheaven, that says something. And then he's got his Mars at 2935 Pisces. So Justin Trudeau has Saturn exactly on his Mars, and he also has Mars making a sesquiquadrate to his Mars. So this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn really does hit Justin Trudeau. So that just could be about his own frustrations, feeling he can't do anything, not enjoying the fact that he's no longer Prime Minister, and feeling he has to do something. What is he going to do? So I'm sure he's not feeling particularly happy, but are we ever going to find out what's it about, what's it all about? Well, still, he does have Sun-Uranus conjunction on his midheaven, and he's got Mars and Saturn hitting his Mars. So maybe there's something. If you're really interested in Justin Trudeau and you have the opportunity, maybe try to find out what's going on there. And another person that came up was the governor of Pennsylvania. And here's the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. I've got nothing really useful to say about it except to say that, like Justin Trudeau, Josh Shapiro has his Mars at 2934, very close together. So at 2934 Pisces. So this Mars Saturn sesquiquadrate is definitely having an impact on him. Again, it might be to do with his private life, but it could be something about his role as the governor of Pennsylvania, as, if you like, the head of state in Pennsylvania. It may say something about something going on in Pennsylvania that requires his attention. And then there is Emmanuel Macron. So Emmanuel Macron has really quite a powerful chart. And we know that Emmanuel Macron really does like to be the centre of attention. And Emmanuel Macron has a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury in the last degree of Sagittarius. And so that means that the Saturn, which is now in the last degree of Pisces, is making a square to his Sun-Mercury conjunction. Furthermore, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate. So that Saturn-Mars hits his Sun-Mercury conjunction. Furthermore, we keep going on. Emmanuel Macron has a Moon-Uranus opposition, which is semisquare his Sun-Mercury conjunction. In other words, we have got transiting Mars square his transiting Mars, square his Uranus, square his Moon, and sesquiquadrate his Sun-Mercury conjunction. So this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate really smashes into Macron's chart. So there's something, I think, that's really going to upset Macron. It's going to make him really frustrated, really, really annoyed. And then the question is, what is he going to do? Is he going to sort of lash out in some way? I mean, are we going to find out? Maybe he'll do something that is quite secretive. I mean, is it something to do with Ukraine? Could be to do with Ukraine. And that brings me on to the final chart I want to look at, and that is Volodymyr Zelensky. I haven't looked at Volodymyr Zelensky's horoscope for some time, so now is a good opportunity. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky does not have anything at 29 degrees mutable. But what Volodymyr Zelensky does have is Mars, it's to do with his Mars and his Saturn and the Aries point. So here's Volodymyr Zelensky's horoscope, and you will see that Volodymyr Zelensky has his Mars at 0 degrees Leo and his Saturn at 28, 29 Leo. He's got Mars and Saturn in Leo. So the his Mars Saturn midpoint is right in the middle of Leo. I mean, to be absolutely precise, his Mars Saturn midpoint is at, I've got it somewhere, is at 20, is at, let's get this right, it is at 1432 Leo. So 1432 Leo is his Mars Saturn midpoint. Now 1432 Leo is sesquiquadrate the Aries point. So Zelensky has his Aries point aspecting his Mars Saturn midpoint. Now, I've talked about this a lot. And if you're someone who has got Aries point on your Mars Saturn midpoint, you are potentially someone who could be involved with mass destruction. It might not be your fault, but it is what you're involved with. And clearly, hundreds of thousands of people, both Russians and Ukrainians, have been dying in this war in Ukraine. And does seem to me that Russian deaths have been rather exaggerated in the West, and Ukrainian deaths have been somewhat under-exaggerated, particularly by Zelensky. If you listen to Zelensky and his estimates on Ukrainian deaths, they are orders of magnitude below the actual figures. So Zelensky, through persisting with this war, for example, through the breakdown of the Istanbul talks in 2022, this war continued. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians died, and he's the president. It's happening on his patch. And here is someone who has got the Aries point sesquiquadrate the Mars Saturn midpoint. So that kind of fits. And so now we have got Mars exactly on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, and we have Saturn sesquiquadrate his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So here is someone who's got Aries point on a Mars-Saturn midpoint in his natal chart, and then he's got a Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate hitting his Aries point again. So it's complete Mars-Saturn. I wonder whether this is going to say something to him, whether it's going to say something about the situation in Ukraine, or it could be about an event. I mean, I don't really want to predict any bad events for Zelensky. I mean, don't forget, Zelensky, he's pretty bulletproof. I mean, he has just continued. I mean, I don't think there's any chance that the Russians want to kill him. I mean, I think in a way, Zelensky's presence as president of Ukraine actually works in Russia's best interests. if Zelensky is killed, it will be his own people. It will be a Ukrainian that kills him. It will probably be a Ukrainian nationalist. I don't think it will be a Russian. And but so far, he has stayed in. He has stayed in power. No one's tried to kill him at the moment. It's in no one's interest. The only reason that someone, a Ukrainian nationalist might want to kill him and then sort of make it look as if it was the Russians that did it, but really it's not in the Russians' interest to kill him anyway. But I'm sure nothing bad will happen to him. But it is a point of vulnerability for him, this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate. And it just may say something about events going on in Ukraine, and it's happening to. And of course, we've just been looking at Emmanuel Macron's chart, and of course, Emmanuel Macron is closely associated with Zelensky and closely associated with the war in Ukraine, and so it could be just about something going on in Ukraine. Maybe not something we'll see, but just a realization about the situation in Ukraine, because so much is hidden. I mean, the public are not told anything about the Ukraine, and they're not told the truth. But if you're Macron or Zelensky, maybe Zelensky's deluding himself, I don't know. But if you're Macron, you have intelligence services. You can see what the real situation is really like. I'm sure if you're Zelensky, really, you have to accept the situation as it is. So I do think overall this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate is a big deal, and I think there are certain people who could be particularly impacted by it, and I think two of those people are Emmanuel Macron and Volodymyr Zelensky. So this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate, I mean, don't be afraid of it. As individuals, it's unlikely to impact us. It just could make it a rather frustrating day. So I don't think there's any need to panic. Of course, don't take any crazy risks with Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. It's a bad day for trying to climb the Eiger, for example. But otherwise, we should be fine. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to. I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.